Okay, let's finish some of these really messy ones that we're using for practice. So here, I see a quotient, I see a product. This one might be the worst one of all. I see cosine of all of that stuff, and then again there's that potential confusion. You need to realize that since it's a cosine squared, it really means the whole thing is squared. So the first thing to focus on here is the square. Okay, so stuff squared, the derivative is going to be 2 times stuff. I think I switched green pens. Hold on, this one's not working that well. E to the 4x times x to the 8 over sine of x cubed. Okay, to the first power. Squared is dealt with. Next is the cosine. The derivative of cosine is minus sine. I'm just going to throw that minus out in front so it doesn't make it look like subtraction, because this is a multiply. Sine of, leave all this alone. Okay, so that was a cosine. And then what we're left with here is a quotient, which means I'm not going to have any more big chains. There might be chains inside my quotient rule, but I'm going to make this big fraction, and when I'm done filling in all the pieces of this big quotient rule fraction, I quit. I don't put anything after this fraction bar. So the only time you put a multiply out at the end and write stuff after it is when you look at something and say, that's a function of a function. And here I say this is a fraction, a quotient of functions, but not a composition of functions. So the bottom, I'm just going to go ahead and fill in, is the old bottom squared. And then the top is the old bottom times the derivative of the old top, which messily is a little product rule hidden in there. So we're going to have a second times the derivative of the first, which is e to the stuff. That'll be itself, multiplied by the derivative of the stuff, the 4x. So this is the second times the derivative of the first, plus the first, e to the 4x, times the derivative of the second, 8x to the 7. Okay. So if we can remember, this is, oh my goodness, I don't even know if I can say what it is. This is a product rule inside of a quotient rule, inside of a double or triple chain rule that we had going. So we have the bottom, derivative of the top, minus the top, 4x times x to the 8. I so wanted this to fit, and it's still not quite going to, times the derivative of the bottom. That's sine of x cubed. So it's sine of stuff, which means we're going to get cosine of stuff. And then here, we'll just sneak it in here, multiplied by the derivative of the stuff, which is a 3x squared. I almost squeezed it into one line. Whew, these ones are really making us work. Okay, number 7. So big thing happening here is this product, but I see some chains and products inside as well. So let's see, dy dx is going to be one giant product rule. So we're going to have stuffs times stuff plus stuff times stuff. So you want to make sure you remember that. There's not going to be anything after that. Within that, there could be other products or chains or quotients or whatever, but that's the big structure, is that one giant product rule. Okay, so we want our second, which is cosine to the 4th, 5 times 2 to the x squared, times the derivative of our first, which is absolutely a mess. This is 3 to a power, so that's going to be 3 to the power times the natural log of 3. And then there's a bunch of composition here. So now I've dealt with the 3, so I'm looking at sine to the 5th of x to the 5th. And remember that that means this 5 is everything raised to the 5th. So what's next is a 5 sine to the 4th of x to the 5th. And this is what people always miss. They want to make it 5 cosine to the 4th. They want to do that all at once or in backwards order. Okay, so now I've dealt with this 5th power, and I need to take the derivative of the sine, which is cosine x to the 5th. And then very last is 5x to the 4th derivative of the innermost function. Okay, so that was second times the derivative of the first, and then we need the first times the derivative of the second, which is another one of those powers of trig functions. And as usual, I'm totally going to run out of room. So here, we'll write it out here, see if I can leave myself enough room. This is the cosine of 5 times 2 to the x squared, all raised to the 4. So it's going to be 4 cosine cubed of 5 times 2 to the x squared. That deals with the fourth power. Now I need the derivative of cosine, which is minus sine. Leave the 5 times 2 to the x squared alone. You can leave the minus with the sign, just make sure it's clear, put a little dot so it's clear that it's not subtraction, it's times. I like to sneak it out front, but it's still sitting right here next to a dot, so it's not a huge difference. Okay, so now I've dealt with the cosine, and I'm left with 5 times 2 to the x squared. The 5 is a constant multiple, so it'll just sit there. The derivative of 2 to the stuff is 2 to the stuff ln 2, and once again I almost squeeze it in and not quite. The last little thing there is a 2x. Derivative of the x squared, which is the very innermost thing. Okay, number 8, the big operation is the quotient, so I'm going to make a big old quotient rule, and when I'm done with that, I'm done. I don't chain anything out at the end. There might be chains inside of this quotient, but there's none at the end. So I'm going to have the bottom squared, and then I'm going to have the bottom times the derivative of the top, which says take the cosine of x to the 6th and then square root it, or 1/2 power it. So we're going to have a 1/2 cosine x to the 6th raised to the negative 1/2. Okay, and that deals with the square root. So now we're just looking at cosine of x to the 6th. So it's cosine of stuff. The derivative of that is minus sine of stuff. And then last thing is the stuff. Derivative of x to the 6th is 6x to the 5th. And then we have a minus the top times the derivative of the bottom. And the bottom is going to be a little product rule. It's not anything too messy, but we still want to be careful. So it's going to be the second times the derivative of the first, which is 6x to the 7, plus the first times the derivative of 6 to the 2x, so that's 6 to the stuff, which means we'll have to multiply, same thing, multiply by an ln of 6, and then I'm closing that, but there's really one more step. The derivative of the 2x, the stuff, is a 2, so I'll sneak that in front. I made it fit in one line, yay! Okay, 2 more to go if you're still with me on this. Okay, so here, let's see, it's a big quotient again. So we need the bottom, 2x cubed minus 5 sine of x to the 5th, times the derivative of the top. Let's see the top. This is 3 times 5 to the 3x. That's just a constant multiple, so that is a times, but it's not a super important one. However, I would say that one is fairly important. Okay, so there's the bottom. Derivative of the top is going to be a product rule, so I'll say that's first and that's second. So we want the second times the derivative of the first. The 3 constant multiple just stay there. Derivative of 5 to the stuff is 5 to the stuff. And then derivative of the stuff is a 3. So there's the second times the derivative of the first. And then we want the first times the derivative of the second, which does have a little chain happening. It's stuff to the 5th, so we'll get 5 times stuff to the 4th. And then we chain out the derivative of stuff, which is actually just a negative 1. Oh my goodness. Okay, so the derivative, the bottom times the derivative of the top fit, but we still need to fit the top. Times the derivative of the bottom. The derivative of the bottom isn't too bad, but I still didn't leave room for it. So the derivative of the bottom is going to be 6x squared minus 5 times the derivative of sine, which is cosine stuff, times the derivative of stuff, which is 5x to the 4th. Okay, so there's the top times the derivative of the bottom, and all of that should be over the bottom squared. Okay, so again, keep in mind, this is supposed to be really messy and tough, and it's just supposed to give you a chance to pick apart, are you really getting all this in the right order? So don't worry about simplify. It's bad enough just to get through all the steps. Just see if you can work through and get all your steps in the right order. Last one. Okay. So the big thing here is the product. You could rewrite it, but I'm fine with doing it in the order it's given. So we want the second times the derivative of the first. And remember, by the time we get through this, second derivative of the first plus first derivative of the second, we're done. We're not changing anything out at the end. Within that, I'm seeing some chains and a quotient rule even, but that's all that I'm going to do in terms of the big structure. Okay, so the derivative of the first is going to be a big old quotient. So we want now the bottom times the derivative of the top, which is stuff to the 1/3. So it's going to be 1/3 stuff to the negative 2/3, and then the derivative of stuff, which is a 2x. Okay, so that's within our product rule, that's the quotient. Bottom times the derivative of the top minus the top times the derivative of the bottom. Okay, so cosine stuff, that's going to become a minus sign, so I'm just going to make that a plus. Sine 2 to the 5x, and then the derivative of 2 to the stuff is 2 to the stuff, natural log 2, and then the derivative of that stuff is a 5. Okay, once again, oh, let me not lose track of where I am. I only have room in my line for the first chunk, and that should all be over the bottom squared. Okay, so did I lose you yet on what I'm doing? Because I about lost me. So I'm in the middle of a product rule. I wanted the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. So here's my first, and this whole messy thing, I'm sorry, I'm saying it backwards. Here's my second, and the derivative of this whole messy thing is the derivative of my first. So second times the derivative of the first, and then I need plus the first times the derivative of the second, which isn't quite so bad. 3 to the stuff is going to be 3 to the stuff, ln 3 multiplied by the derivative of the stuff, and then derivative of x is 1. All right, hopefully that didn't completely freak you out, give you some really good messy practice. Thanks for watching.